The Belonger, a novel, written by Kathleen Mehuron, and narrated by Kathleen Hewitt. Chapter 37. Byron and Holly's helicopter landed at the Jags McCartney Airport on Grand Turk Island 4 days later. Though it was totally shut down and most of the roof was torn off the building, the pilot was able to set the chopper down on a runway. Montez's truck was already parked and waiting when they opened the helicopter door. Fabienne and Samira were there with him, the two of them huddled together out of the range of the blast of air the propeller was sending out. Since Byron couldn't use his arms to hang on to the door jamb as he got out, both Holly and Montez helped him with the long step down. The pilot didn't bother to cut his engine, and it was deafening. Montez reached into the chopper to grab their bags, and the three of them ducked as they got out from under the blades as quickly as possible. As soon as they were clear, Fabienne came running toward them. Holly was mystified when she tried to hand her an old green beer bottle whose label had peeled off. Fabienne repeatedly pointed to the neck of the bottle, so Holly took it from her and looked inside. She discovered a note that had been rolled up and inserted. She pulled it out with her pinky finger and read it on the spot. My dearest Holly, if you are reading this, you have found your way home to Cockburn Town, and I thank God for it. I would also assume Byron must be well enough for travel. I, for one, will be anxious to hear that good news for certain. I was out fishing to try to help feed our neighborhood, here on Queen's Quay, when I coincidentally ran into our friend Kell, doing the same for his own friends on Grand Turk. I asked if he would bring this note back to you. A bottle was all we could find to keep it dry. Although the choice was born of necessity, I think a message in a bottle is a good seaworthy image, don't you? I miss you terribly, but I fear it will be some days before I can consider making the trip over to see you. The first issue is we are still patching up buildings simply to keep the weather out and people safe from falling rubble. Water for bathing and cooking will continue to be an issue until we can fix some of the cisterns. The army brought in limited quantities of canned and dried foods after you left for Provo, but people here on Queen's Quay still need the fish we are harvesting for fresh protein. There is a serious shortage of gasoline that inhibits my ability to travel as well, though the government may help me on that count, because I'm out doing official work foraging for food. My life is very primal these days. I feel like it's me against the seas, and when I'm on land, the elements. Mighty foes indeed. Thank God for Mateus, who sends his regards, by the way. To be completely truthful, the only thing that keeps me going these days is the many memories of you I keep carefully stored away in a corner of my mind, and the anticipation I may once again hold you in my arms. Please don't give up on us, Holly, my beautiful girl. I wish you a dry place to stay and food on your table. We can't hope for more than that right now, can we? Until I see you again, my love always, Anthony. Holly flattened the letter, folded it in half, and slid it inside her shirt, where it remained next to her heart. It was over 2 weeks later when Holly spotted Anthony's fishing boat in the distance, and even, just barely, made Mateus and him out on the deck. She jumped up and ran into the kitchen, where she reached for a clean napkin off the top of the linen pile and buried her face in it, wiping her eyes. It was barely 3 o'clock in the afternoon. She waited for him on pins and needles. The minutes found her bouncing from the ball of one foot to the other. When the angelfish anchored and the men got into their kayaks to head for shore, she ran down to the beach to greet them, waving her arms high over her head. It only took one look at Anthony as he staggered in, dragging his kayak up onto the beach to assess the situation. "You're drunk?" she scolded him. "Of course I'm drunk," he shouted back to her. "I started drinking the second we got on board." As he drew closer, he added with a laugh, "How else could I find the courage to come to your place of business and declare my everlasting love for you?" She threw her hands up. This wasn't at all how she'd planned for their reunion to go. For one thing, Byron and Montez were leaning over the railing of the Roseate, watching and listening to everything they were saying. With a jerk of her thumb, she pointed toward them to indicate that him saying such things in their proximity embarrassed her. But she couldn't help but shake her head and smile. As was their custom, she felt compelled to give him a hard time. She mugged at him. "Maybe you should come back when you've had a chance to sober up and think things over, Lord Bascombe." Shorts dripping, one hand clasping each of her shoulders, he held her at arm's length in front of him. His appreciative once-over made her feel like a ripe piece of fruit he was dying to bite into. "I've had 48 years to think things over," he said. "You can see for yourself all the good it's done me." His eyes were soulful, though puffy, and his face covered with a salt and pepper stubble. Holly hugged him tightly, even though he was sticky with sweat. "I've missed you, you old scallywag." She let go of him and called over to Matthias, "I've missed you as well," before turning on her heels and heading back toward the Sand Dollar. Celebratory cocktails to mark their unexpected arrival were in order. When the drinks were made and poured, Holly raised her own glass to Matthias and Anthony in a toast. "Welcome back," she said. "I will never forget your courage during and after Hurricane Nestor. Here's to a calm and tranquil future." "Hear, hear," they chorused, including Byron and Montez, although they were all fully aware that 2 more months of hurricane season, not to mention a massive cleanup, stretched before them. In many ways, the Sand Dollar was the heart of old Cockburn Town, even when it wasn't serving food. It remained a handy gathering spot for the community, and that warmed Holly's heart. The restaurant still wasn't officially open, and wouldn't be until the town's power and water were restored. Holly figured it would be months and months before that happened. The damage, at least, wasn't overly bad. Though the restaurant floor was fairly open to the elements, she'd spent the extra money early on to install secured hurricane doors for the kitchen and bar. And that foresight had spared the contents inside from destruction during the storm. Like many of the buildings on Grand Turk, most of their exterior paint job had been sandblasted off in irregular patterns and taken off chunks of the wall stucco. It gave the Sand Dollar the look of a rundown inner-city tenement building. When Holly and Byron had first arrived back from the hospital on Provo, the outdoor floor of the restaurant had been covered with over a foot of sand, and one corner of the roof of the seating area had been pushed up by the howling forces into a shape resembling a ski jump. Since then, Holly and her staff had cleared off the cement floor, first shoveling the heavy sand — her arms had ached for days after that effort — and then sweeping in endless rounds. It was as if fine particles were still falling out of the sky. Holly would think they were done with the cleaning, only to find another fine layer of grit to deal with when she came back 15 minutes later. It was still possible to cook on the built-in oil drum barbecue, as it had survived relatively unscathed, and she had numerous bags of Haitian charcoal stashed away that had, fortunately, stayed dry. She could also use the propane range in the kitchen if she lit it by hand. Water to flush toilets was hauled from the 2 cisterns on the Roseate's property to the bathrooms. She was vigilant about this area of maintenance. She was fine with the idea of sharing her facilities, but she was not about to clean up after other adults, and she wasn't going to ask her staff to do so either, not when there was so much other work to be done. Every corner she walked past was filled with garbage. Every minute of every day was needed to return the street to some kind of order. She firmly believed if each person worked toward it, they could establish a new sense of normal for their island in good time. Holly encouraged locals to gather on her property around lunchtime, dinner time, and even long into the night, as she and Byron had plenty of fuel to fill their tiki lights after the sunset. The mere thought of going home to blackness was daunting for many, and people often stayed on until late in the evening and visited. She dragged 2 coolers out and left them at the restaurant for others to use. Those first weeks after the storm, Someone would get the charcoal going about 10 in the morning. Folks would stop in throughout the day and into the dinner hour with a piece of meat to cook and a drink to sip. She also set up a folding table for the dishes friends brought to share. Her supply of paper plates was dwindling. Fortunately, people were polite enough to wash their used ceramic plates in water from a bucket. For the most part, Holly's open-door policy was working well. The harmony of these unspoken agreements with her neighbors seemed to stem from one simple fact. No one in Turks and Caicos had been killed by the massive Hurricane Nestor. This was a miracle, a true miracle. God had been good to Grand Turk. Chapter 38. Byron's arms were crossed in front of him by a system of slings that Holly helped him put on every morning. Because he couldn't hold a glass up, he was forced by necessity to drink liquids through a straw. Even that was an interesting process to watch, as he was only able to move his index and middle fingers. Right now, the beverage in question was a beer. "Is this experience supposed to teach me something?" he demanded from his seat at a low table near the bar. "You know I hate feeling helpless." "Who doesn't?" Holly said. "The idea of getting old terrifies me. That you will have to do things for me. How do you think your grandparents feel that they can't even change a light bulb anymore? Maybe the lesson is simple. You give me a hard time because you think I don't see you as a grown man. Okay, you're grown. You've still got 2 broken limbs. It's temporary. I'll be hands-off when you're a bit better." Fabienne stood by him now and helped him by guiding the straw to his lips. Byron, looking taken by her kindness, beckoned her closer and kissed her on the cheek. An entire universe couldn't have contained the smile she gave him in return. He stroked her cheek with one of his working fingers, and she glowed down at him. Montez cracked open a beer and took a sip. Holly could tell by the look on his face that he was disgusted by its nearly warm temperature, but he didn't dare complain to her. As the days passed without electricity, ice was harder to come by on the island. Holly and Byron had had the foresight to install a small gasoline generator for their chest freezer. It was saving much of their inventory, and they were happy for it. Every evening, Holly snuck in a few trays of ice to use for the following day. But the truth was, clean bottled drinking water on island was running out too. Rumor was her only news source, as there was no television, radio, internet, or cell service. There was gossip that another boat full of supplies was coming over from Provo. Until she saw it pull into the cruise center with her own eyes, Holly would keep a conservative eye on her reserves of drinking water, and even the runoff reserves in the cistern. If that meant less than ice-cold beer, so be it. She stood behind the bar wiping it down and feeling the grit as she cleaned. She would only serve hard alcohol if a customer had cash, but even then she felt uneasy unlocking the grates that protected their rows of liquor bottles. Since no one knew how long the isolation on Grand Turk would last, she didn't want to flaunt the fact she had a full inventory of booze when there were only a few police to keep order. At the moment, the police officers have many more important demands on their time. My alcohol is far from the top priority. 2 strong men with crowbars could easily break into this locked system. Then I'd have to repair that too, and who knows how long it would take to get new parts in from Miami. Nevertheless, Anthony had cash, an unending supply of it, or so it seemed to Holly, and he stood before her now, wanting another rum punch. She smiled as she filled his order. "Only 2 pieces of ice," she said in a bossy tone. "That's all I'm giving you." He scratched his chin and spoke in a low voice. "That's fine, my lovely. I understand." His collared shirt was rumpled, his face flushed. "You should probably give me a bottle of water, too." Byron rose from his table and came over. "I can't believe our boats survived. It's unbelievable." Anthony raised his glass to Byron. "A little worse for wear, but considering. I know yours was damaged, but it's still afloat and serviceable. We can't ask for more, can we?" Byron nodded his head in agreement, and they clinked glasses. "Crazy," Byron said. "Then again, I've always heard Deep Creek's a good refuge for boats." "It proved to be this time. What a stroke of good luck." Holly noticed when Montez turned toward Anthony with a curled lip. Her heart skittered with concern. Montez had already told her he'd decided his priorities in his life as it stood right now. He said he needed to help his son navigate the physical demands of life with two casted arms, and patiently show Holly she could trust him in the way she had over 2 decades earlier. He had 3 times now explained to her in great detail how he'd made a terrible mistake, and it turned out he loved her after all. She didn't argue with him when he said it, but she stopped the conversation each time with a fairly quiet, "People have all kinds of reactions to devastating events, Montez. In this hurricane, we've all been through trauma, so it isn't the time to make an important decision. We need to heal, and there's so much work to be done." After the 3rd of those uncomfortable moments, she'd finally realized he was interpreting this to mean she was much too busy to be thinking about him, and she knew Montez well enough to know that must be making him crazy. He was not a man to be kept waiting. He always assumed if he ever came around to my way of thinking, I would be right there waiting. And I would have been. I always thought he would go out and sow his oats, but in the end come back to me and Byron. What has changed? It can't just be that I had sex with Anthony. Granted, it was good, but it wasn't good enough to change everything, was it? Holly wasn't trying to play games with Montez, but it seemed her reticence made her all the more attractive to him. He said he didn't take Anthony as any kind of serious threat, but he had wondered aloud more than once about what happened between them during the storm. She felt she could read his mind. "I have money and prestige in our community. He's nothing but a clown, a bit of a madman even. What possible competition could he be?" To add to her confusion and distraction, Anthony had already declared his love for her twice today since arriving back on island. She'd smacked him the 2nd time, though not terribly hard. She had rolled her eyes, too. She was simply too worn out to make the effort considering her future with any man would require. Being pushed to decide between these two during these especially difficult times was ridiculous. Anthony was planted at the edge of the floor now, waiting for her, she knew, but he must have gotten bored, for he had turned around to face the waves. It made her laugh when every now and again she saw some ocean spray shoot up and spray him in the face, though it made her nervous that he was standing where the only section of the railing was missing. They'd had to remove it because the storm had bent it so badly it had blocked the flow of traffic in and out of the kitchen. As Holly saw it, the big problem with Anthony's position was the 5-foot drop-off in front of him. Luckily, there was a deep swimming hole below, so it would be hard to hurt yourself in a fall, unless you didn't know how to swim. Or, as in Anthony's case, you were drunk. Some of the local children had discovered it after Nestor, and begged her the last few days to let them jump off. They now called it the Big Splash. Anthony had admitted to drinking on the way over on the boat, and he now had the 2nd tall tumbler in his hand that she'd poured for him. They had all lost too much in recent days for her to want to risk any further injury, but neither did she have time to watch over the man. She had to run inside and find some serving spoons. As she passed him, she said, "Anthony, go save us some seats. All the food will be hot soon." Much to her relief, he did as she asked, and she saw Byron sit down across the table from him. The breeze carried their conversation straight to her. Byron's bright green eyes lit up. "How you doing, Anthony?" "Never better, Byron. The better question is, how are you doing? Is it terribly painful?" "It's not the best time I've ever had. But they took good care of me in the hospital, and it was awesome that Mom and Dad got over to be with me." Holly was so grateful to Montez in that moment. She couldn't keep a satisfied little smile off her face. Anthony looked somber. "Let's hope the worst of times are behind us for a while." Montez slid into the chair next to his son, and Holly brought over 4 white dinner plates and 4 table settings wrapped up in paper napkins. As she laid out the place settings, she told them, "Go up and serve yourselves, but be mindful of your portions. Who knows how many people we'll need to feed here tonight." Chapter 39. Holly drifted to the front door and watched the street for signs of more guests coming down the road. She thought to wait an hour or so to make a plate for her own supper, allowing others a chance first. She changed her mind when she ran her hands down her sides and thought about all the weight she'd lost over the last few weeks. You need to eat something, Holly Walker. You can't take care of others if you don't take care of yourself. She saw Byron had found some friends while waiting in the line. As she stood with her plate, she watched him horse around as best he could, given his limitations. She was at the end of the queue, not far from where Anthony and Montez were still seated. She heard Anthony say, "Shall we wait for them to start?" "That could take ages," Montez said. "You know how the two of them like to talk." Anthony laughed in response. "Anthony, I want you to know I have proposed to Holly a future," Montez said slowly. "One we would share together." Holly took in a sharp breath. This can't be happening right now. Anthony was clearly astounded. He carefully enunciated, "You proposed?" Montez raised his brows. "Well, I didn't buy a ring if that's what you're asking." "So, let's be forthright," Anthony said. "It's just us 2 men sitting here. You don't want to lose Holly, but you don't want to marry her either." Holly surreptitiously looked over her shoulder, wanting to see their faces. Montez gave a shrug. "What are formalities to people at our age?" Anthony pushed his plate away and put his forearms on the table. He shook his head and stared into Montez's eyes and, in a deep and rumbling voice, said, "It's everything. Celebrating falling in love, for probably the last time in our lives, is everything. You are an idiot, Montez. Though we've been friends for years, you are as wrong can be." He shot up out of his seat and ran over to Holly, who had just reached the food table. The look on his face told her he had a desperate need to talk to her. He offered her his help holding her plate while she spooned the various dishes onto it. He kept a running dialogue going concerning his opinion on the different covered dishes that made up the buffet. She laughed when she and Anthony finally sat down. "Honestly, I'm more than capable of carrying a plate of food across the room," she told him. "No matter," Anthony said. "It's a chance for us to steal a moment. I must confess I am happy to see Montez has moved on from the table." Holly stopped short of teasing him any further because of the hangdog expression he continued to wear. He gently took one of her hands in his. "My darling, I need to tell you something. Something that can't wait." Since it was obvious he was serious, she released a silent sigh and pushed her plate away. "Okay." He began to talk a mile a minute and set to painting a picture. "When I was young, a boy really, just 18, I fathered a child." Holly noticed Anthony was watching her carefully, so she tried not to show a strong reaction at this disclosure. "The mother was a girl who came to Queen's Cay, as so many do, for work." "She was from another country?" Holly asked. "Yes, and a few years younger than me. It was as if I couldn't resist her beauty, not that she encouraged me." He shook his head. "I was persistent, and I won her over. And when she gave herself to me, it was with her whole heart. My parents were furious, not because she wasn't one of us, but because she was poor. And callow fellow I was, her Catholicism proved to be an inconvenience to me. You see, I couldn't see any reason for her not to be rid of the baby. I confess this to you freely because I want you to understand who I was back then, and perhaps better understand the man I am now." The story was a shock. Holly's face reddened. She met his eyes, but then lowered them down to the table, somehow knowing he needed this to continue. He let out a quivering sigh. Cheeky bastard I was. I started dating an American girl whose name I can't even recall now. I made a show of it so my child's mother would understand I was done with her. Quite simply, I don't think I'm exaggerating at all when I say this, it broke her heart. I'm overcome with shame when I think about it. Anthony's voice shook with emotion. I can't believe I was capable of such a thing. She went home to Haiti in disgrace. The admission made Holly clasp her hands together and bow her head as if in prayer. Before she had a chance to ask, Anthony cleared his throat and said, barely above a whisper, I never met my son. He closed his eyes and took a moment. Holly sat perfectly still, anxious for him to finish. Finally, I heard through friends that they both died years ago in the earthquake. Since I had disappointed her in such a spectacular fashion, I didn't believe I deserved love. And that, he reached across the table and pulled one of her hands to his mouth and kissed it. My dear, dear Holly. When he paused again, Holly's entire being mourned from the suffering of the situation, one she could easily understand. Anthony drew in another firm breath, seemingly so he'd have the strength to continue, and said in almost a whisper, That is the reason I have never married. Holly wiped her lips with her napkin. Until me? She shook her head. I go 43 years without an offer, and now the two of them are fighting over me. Unbelievable. He stroked her hand with his thumb. You always understand me. Intuitively. It's a gift, really. He wore his affection for her with the open face of someone far younger than he actually was. Holly fought the desire to nervously laugh the moment off. It was just too intense to bear. She was startled to see Montez suddenly appear over Anthony's left shoulder and stare at her with a frown and his arms crossed. She removed her hand from Anthony's and nervously took a bite from her supper plate. I am starving. Montez appeared impatient as he shifted in place. With a glare that was almost comical, he said, I wish to speak with you. I'm eating, Holly said, and waved her hand in the air to dismiss him. Sit down and speak if you want to speak. I don't have time for a big drama right now. I want to speak to you alone, Montez insisted. She grinned up at him with what she knew was an impish expression. That's not possible, Montez. As soon as I'm done eating, I've got to get back to work. Is this really about their respective love for me, or is it a male competition? Just two studs staking their claim? Anthony stood and asked, Would you like me to refill your water glass? She was happy he had broken the tension. Please. When he walked away, Montez followed him. Holly was horrified to hear Montez yell, She is not for you, Anthony. Everyone froze. She was embarrassed that all their friends and their son were now listening. Anthony was rooted to the ground, his feet planted wide apart. You had your chance, Montez. Be a gentleman and let Holly and me explore this time in our lives. If looks could kill, Montez's dark gaze would have done so. He said, We are a family. Anthony spit on the ground near Montez's feet. Only last week you didn't think so. Holly began quaking that this altercation might come to blows. Honestly, do men ever really grow up? Why would she choose you? Montez asked tersely. I know you think I'm just an old beach bum, Montez. Perhaps that was true in the past. But that woman makes me want to be a better man, and so I shall be. Besides, let us face the facts. I'm just more fun than you are. That last statement caught Holly off guard. She laughed so hard she put her forehead down on the table for a few seconds. Truer words have never been spoken. After composing herself, Holly rose from the table. Both men turned and watched her when she stood up and walked toward the kitchen carrying all their plates. By this time, Coralise had arrived with 4 volunteers from her church. Thankfully, she had just missed the confrontation. Although Byron could be of no real help to the church ladies, he went over and stood next to his grandmother and teased her playfully as she stood in line, which gave Holly some comfort. No matter what those two old fools think is going to happen next, this is my world, here at the Sand Dollar with Byron. She watched as Fabienne fed her son a special treat she had brought with her, and Holly noticed how he nearly doubled over at something she whispered into his ear. What's going on with those two? Coralise swatted at Holly with a towel when she attempted to enter the kitchen to clean. "You've done quite enough work for one day, missy. Shoo!" She opened her mouth to argue, but she was loudly overruled by Coralise and her friends. She knew better than to disagree with Byron's grandmother, so she wandered back outside. Recent days had been a flurry of crucial activity, making it impossible to relax. She remained the same bundle of nervous energy she'd been since the day she learned Nestor was coming, uncertain where to turn next. Anthony brought her glass of water to where she stood by the big splash, feeling wistful. "A penny for your thoughts?" he asked. Holly knitted her brows and flung one side of her hair back over her shoulder. "I was thinking about the kids who were jumping into the water here today. They were so thrilled. Nothing could make them happier than the simple joy of bounding in. I would give anything to feel that way. I didn't have much of a childhood, as you know, and I'm afraid it's too late for me. Maybe I don't have the capacity for feeling that kind of thrill, or even happiness. Maybe I don't have the aptitude for it. I know how to work. That's all I know how to do." She stared at her feet and held her breath. "I don't want to disappoint Anthony, but I've only fallen head over heels in love once in my life. If it hadn't been for Byron, I would say it was a big mistake. It's not like I'm going to become someone else overnight. I've been on my own for so long." Anthony put his arm around her and kissed her on the top of her head. "When things settle down here, what say I rent us a sailboat? I know this ocean like the back of my hand. Oh, Holly, the places I can show you will take your breath away." She thought it was a wonderful idea. The perfect opportunity to get to know each other better without making any kind of long-term commitment. But she didn't get the chance to answer him because just then, Byron came over with a glass of rum balanced between his casts. "Mom, this is for you." 3 sips of lip-loosening rum, and she growled out, "Byron, what am I going to do about your father?" Seeming surprised by the question, he said, "Geez," and looked away. Anthony nudged him. Looking back at Holly, Byron released a soft laugh. "You mean the whole, we need to be a real family thing?" She was grateful she wasn't the only one who'd been listening to this. "Yes, what is that all about?" She had an unintended whine in her voice. "I'm not sure," Byron shrugged. "We've all been through hell. A lot of people are saying crazy things lately. Dad's not alone." As the rum warmed her thoughts, she steadied her blue-eyed stare into his green one. "How do you feel about what he's saying, honey?" Anthony held up a finger. "Would you two like some privacy?" Byron put his hand on Anthony's shoulder. "No, it's fine. Don't leave. Mom probably needs us both right now." He met his mother's eyes again, and she nodded. "When I was young, I used to dream you and Dad would get together," he admitted. "Isn't that every kid's dream if their parents are apart? But Mom, I'm a grown man now, as I have been telling you so often lately. You've done so much for me. And you did everything yourself. If I have a say, then I say it's all about you. This is your time." I could not be prouder of him, Holly thought. I did at least one thing right with my life. "Thank you, honey." She reached up and gave his shoulder a gentle squeeze. When Byron walked away, Anthony continued on about his idea of taking a trip. "We'll have a wonderful time sailing. Surely Byron will give you a few weeks away. After the clean-up, of course. He's more than capable of taking care of things here. In the meantime, my dear—" He took her hand and pulled her toward the edge of the patio to behold the aqua swimming hole below. "When I feel foolish about trying something that's fun, I think of your American poet, Robert Frost. So was I once myself a swinger of birches, and so I dream of going back to be. What do you think, Holly? Shall we give it a go?" She appreciated his sentiment more than he could possibly know. "Can you please wait 1 minute?" She handed him her glass. Holly slipped the bottoms of her shorts down. She unbuttoned the blue checked shirt she wore over her bikini and took it off. After stowing the shirt and shorts in the kitchen, she watched Byron and Montez from inside. They were now together at the bar, sipping their beers, unaware of her presence. After some reflection, she walked back outside and headed straight toward them. But once she was behind them, she discovered she was unable to find her voice. With sudden resolve, she managed to squeeze in between them and say, "I've got to talk to your dad. Can you give us a minute?" Holly thought Byron must have a sense of what was going on. He shrugged and moved away. Though she felt clumsy, she placed a hand on Montez's forearm and got his full attention. "You're a good man, Montez Curry," she said slowly. "I'm so glad we had our Byron. But that was a long time ago." He flinched, blinking his eyes rapidly. Upon recovering from her statement, the expression he wore was blazing, determined. "Long ago, but not too late," he said firmly. "I am sure of it." Holly shook her head. "There are other things left for me to do, and I'm sorry, but they have nothing to do with you. So I'm going to say no to your offer. But thank you, Montez." "Holly." She put her hand on his and shook her head again, stopping him. She really didn't want to spend any more time on this fantasy of his. With a relieved smile on her face, she realized she considered his proposal a trivial matter. Who would have thunk it? I trust my ability to create a beautiful life for myself more than I trust this man to give me one. The truth is, Montez, I'm sure you'll get over it quickly. Let's just leave it at that." She spun away and headed for the big splash. As she approached, Anthony bowed deeply at the waist. She found she was getting used to his swashbuckling ways. He gestured toward the aqua pool, and everything was perfectly clear. No further words needed to be spoken. Holly ran forward and jumped with her knees and arms high in the air. She let out an extended whoop of delight that lasted until she landed on her behind in the water. Though she took in a mouthful of salty ocean as she went under, she laughed with joy upon surfacing. As she wiped the salt water from her eyes, she heard another splash close to her and allowed herself to float back toward the noise she knew was Anthony. They treaded water as they watched the sun setting. It would be any second. It seemed right when the rim flashed green with the true color of hope, just as the last of the sun sank below the horizon. A great cheer went up from those assembled. "Somehow you make magic wherever you go," Anthony shouted to her. For the first time in my life, I actually believe it. Epilogue. 3 weeks after Hurricane Nestor moved away from Turks and Caicos and on to decimate parts of the coast of Florida, a few flights were landing on Grand Turk Island. As they later told the story, Toby and Sally Trombley were 2 of 12 passengers on board their Air Caribbean flight who were dying to see their loved ones. They anxiously deplaned and searched for a method of transportation to get to the Roseate house. Although tools would not normally be allowed through a security checkpoint, Toby managed to bring in a suitcase full of them, along with solar chargers for the batteries that powered them. The way he told it, the woman who was completing their visas at customs asked, "Anything to declare?" His response was a decisive, "No." She unzipped the suitcase and stared at him defiantly. "You sure?" "It's a state of emergency, miss," he said, and she let him through. Holly was down the street visiting with her friend Deb in the shade of a stucco wall when she saw cabman Jack pull his van in front of the inn. When she saw the Trombleys climb out, without a word to Deb in parting, she took off sprinting. She didn't know she was making a sound, but they later told her she was screaming, "Ah!" for the length of the 2 short blocks it took to reach them. Both of the new arrivals had their arms outstretched in anticipation of her embrace, but it was Toby who absorbed the impact of Holly's 120 pounds as she hurled herself into his arms. He was much taller than she, and her legs dangled as he rocked her back and forth. Sally moved closer to pat her on the back as he did. When Toby set her on the ground, the 3 of them stood together in a group hug. Sally whispered hoarsely, "We have been worried sick." But it wasn't until Byron emerged and she saw his crossed arms bound up in slings and his still blackened eyes that she burst into tears. In addition to having the daily communal meals still going on, Holly now had a full house. School was canceled indefinitely. Town garbage trucks combed the roads, back and forth, up and down. Every inhabitant who was old enough to walk and young enough to pull the garbage out of the trees and bushes and off the rooftops that were left intact did so. Oversized garbage bags were distributed, filled, and picked up by the drivers manning the trucks within hours. Despite the efficiency, the cleanup seemed a Sisyphean task. Days turned into weeks, which turned into months. Still, the hard work continued, and at the end of every long day, there were some who needed to be fed. Thanksgiving was approaching when Toby and Sally told Holly they simply had to get back to the farm. By then, they had single-handedly torn the damaged roof off the section of the inn that was Holly's bedroom and replaced it with new plywood and blue corrugated metal roofing. "It's better than the old one," Holly told them as they were saying goodbye at the airport, which now had a few flights a day regularly going to and from Providenciales, although the main building was still boarded up. When Sally turned away from Holly with tears in her eyes, Toby stepped in. "Just remember, the Trombley clan, all of us, is coming for the week of Thanksgiving next year. And no discounts. You need to make a living like everyone else." "That's a lot of money. You'll fill the place." Holly flushed. Toby grabbed Sally and put his arm around her. "It's our 30th anniversary right around then, too. It's what we want. All those rugrats of ours are coming with us." Holly stood transfixed, trying to think of ways to make the week special for them. Byron, as if reading her mind, said, "We'll borrow a bunch of kayaks and take them all the way up North Creek. It'll be fun." "All right then," she agreed. "A year from now, we should be ready for company." Food donations from the churches and local government were piled high in the kitchen of the Sand Dollar. A water truck came regularly to fill Holly's tanks, and a local provider dropped off a steady supply of propane. There were volunteers to help, but it fell primarily to Holly to make something out of the resources. After all, how many ways were there to turn beans and rice into a hot meal for a crowd? 10 months passed while Grand Turk Islanders worked to salvage their homes and businesses, to rebuild the seawall that bordered Front Street, and to raise money for the library and the hospital, both of which had suffered serious damage from Nestor. Holly and Byron fully participated in those fundraising efforts, and when the opening days for the facilities arrived, they were filled with satisfaction. A renewed sense of order came when utilities were finally restored from one end of the island to the other. The obvious choice to host a gathering of celebration was, of course, the Sand Dollar. Over time, as people slowly recovered from their traumas, they began telling and retelling tales of the Great Storm. It became clear to townspeople that there were several citizens who had acted heroically during Nestor and its aftermath. It was not an exaggeration to say they had saved lives, and certainly helped the town to rebound after the direct hit of the eye of the storm. An idea was born to have a ceremony to celebrate these people at Dillon Hall, which had the largest capacity for a seated audience in town. It was a historic building that belonged to, and sat behind, the Anglican church on Front Street. Like the church itself, its stucco was painted white, and it had glossy, bright red exterior shutters. Inside the hall, the soaring ceiling with its ancient exposed wood beams was awe-inspiring. Along one wall was a stage with a sound system. The floor was made of the same dark wood as the beams, though it had a shiny patina from thousands of feet walking across it through the years. Holly was humbled and honored to even be invited to the event, let alone chosen to receive a plaque. Teresa was composed and regal as she stood before the microphone in a long red dress that evening. Her husband Joab was behind her, wearing a suit and tie, and holding their baby, Holland. He also sported a proud look on his face. Teresa spoke at length, though Holly's ears roared so loudly from her nervousness that she only caught the last part of the introduction. "We are so grateful that the life of our son, perhaps my own life as well, was spared because of Holly's courage and take-charge attitude. We will surely never forget it. I thank the Lord every day she was there." Applause thundered when they invited Holly to come to the stage. She was struck with a moment of intense déjà vu that made her feel as if she'd waited her whole life for this very moment. When she arrived at the microphone, a local member of the ruling cabinet handed her the plaque and read what it said aloud. "On behalf of Queen Elizabeth II, the Governor of TCI, and the Premier, we bestow this distinction for extraordinary bravery and service. With this, we also commemorate that Miss Holly Ann Walker is awarded the honorary title of Belonger." Overcome with emotion, the best Holly could do was mumble into the mic, "Thank you for this honor. I love you all." When another speaker stood up to give the second introduction, she bolted. Byron followed her out the double doors leading into the black of the night. When he found her, he asked, "What is it, Mom?" and handed her several tissues. She appreciated that he knew enough about her to have come prepared with Kleenex. She wiped her eyes and blew her nose, unable to speak. After a minute, she took his arm and moved with him to the open doorway to watch the rest of the ceremony. During a break between recipients, she prepared herself to explain her tears, but she couldn't. "You're crying because we're finally home," Byron said, a beaming smile on his face. "Look at you, Mom. A belonger." She thought how in a few months all the Trombleys would be coming. She and Anthony had already decided that as soon as they left, the two of them would head out on their sailboat adventure. They planned to return on Christmas Eve. Byron was happy he would have the chance to show her he could handle the business on his own. She looked over at him. His face reflected the golden spotlights that illuminated the stage. His bright green eyes shone with curiosity for what the recipient currently on stage would say. "I'm not going to tell you I don't really deserve this honor," the man joked. "My wife has already said so many times." Holly and Byron cracked up. Still chuckling, she put a hand on his arm and stood on her tiptoes to whisper in his ear, "I better go back and get set up. A lot of these people will be coming to the Sand Dollar after." "I'll come and help you," he said quickly. She shushed him. "Stay and watch. I'll see you later." The truth was, Holly wanted to walk back home along the seawall alone. The moon was just rising, and the dome of stars tonight was brilliant. The waves, with their luminescent crests, would entertain her, and she was sure that a wild donkey or horse or dog would pad alongside her and keep her company. She longed to feel the mist of the ocean spray. In fact, she thought she might sit up there on the wall and linger for a while. Maybe she would try to retrace all the steps that had led her to this jubilant time and place. One thing she knew for sure in this moment: of all the wonderful and difficult things in her life, discovery had turned out to be the best teacher of all. Acknowledgements. I joke that my husband and I have the perfect marriage because while Tom's out golfing or scuba diving, I have the time to write. That is, of course, an oversimplification. He sacrifices plenty while I am absorbed by the written word and lost in my stories. Thank you, my love. Additional appreciation to my greatest cheerleaders, my 3 sons, Bruce, Jonathan, and Thomas. Special gratitude to my eldest, Bruce, for loving Grand Turk as much as I do, reading an early draft of The Belonger carefully, and giving me honest feedback. To Jonathan for teaching me all he knows about crafting a story arc, and he knows a lot. And Thomas for being interested enough to ask intelligent questions. You all make me a better writer. My pod, my crew, my posse. Brooke, Carrie, Chuck, and Susan. Life is just better with you in it. We hold each other up, no snarking, no jealousy. When one of us wins, we all win. Deborah Vieira, for orienting us to the balmy island of Grand Turk. It is she who sold us our first house there and helped us to rebuild it after Hurricanes Irma and Maria knocked it down with a 1-2 punch in quick succession. Also, for the many nights of too much fun and showing me where all the best food is at. Deb's daughters, Tanya and Katya Vieira, the owners of Sandbar Restaurant and Manta House Vacation Bungalows, where I wrote much of the novel. Mother Deb and daughters are 3 of the formidable women I dedicated this book to. Tanya's husband and our builder, Therese James, and his brother, architect Ricky James. What you created for us went beyond our expectations. The dashing Tim Dunn, who mentioned that he was a descendant of pirates and set this story off and running. All the friends and tradesmen who became friends who helped in our darkest hour, particularly Arthur, Bradleo, Conrad, Desius, Frankie, Henry, Joab, Kristen, and Marvin. Editor and best-selling author Marley Gibson, who was instrumental in developing this book. She has been a constant resource, supporter, and friend. When are you coming down to dive on Grand Turk? Best-selling authors James M. Tabor and Chris Radish. Your mentorship keeps me striving to be as good a writer as both of you are. Turks and Caicos' own educator and author Debbie Lee V. Smith Mills for consulting on language and culture. And lastly, best-selling author Carrie Schaefer for her invaluable advice. And many thanks to the team at She Writes Press, Spark Press. Your unshakable belief that I have stories worth telling keeps me writing away. Brooke Warner, Samantha Strom, Chris Alagos, and publicist Crystal Patriarch. You always point me in the right direction. About the author. Mary Kathleen Mehuron lives and teaches in a ski town in Vermont, where everyone calls her Kathy, and she and her husband raised 3 sons. She has a weekly column in her local newspaper, The Valley Reporter, called Take Me Back. The Vermont Arts Council recently gave her an artist development grant, and she is using it to grow the column into a nonfiction book whose sales will benefit the Mad River Valley Historical Societies. She is the author of 2 previous novels, Fading Past and The Opposite of Never. When she's not writing or exercising, she's hanging out with her husband, her 3 dogs, or her longtime posse of friends. You will also find her at any local event that has live music. She's the one out on the floor dancing. She takes extended time to work on her novels on Grand Turk Island and in Vermont's Northeast Kingdom. This has been The Belonger, a novel, written by Mary Kathleen Mehuron and narrated by Carolyn Hewitt, produced by VoiceOver Vermont Studios. For more information about the author and other books she has written, please visit marykathleenmehuron.com. Thank you for listening.